And I'm going to kick us off. Now, folks, the riots, right, they may well have fizzled out, but I think it's time we face the real problem. Two-tier identity politics is actually what's ripping Britain to shreds. You've got white working-class communities, especially in the north, feeling completely abandoned, livelihoods decimated, voices ignored, and now they're watching as the state gives preferential treatment to everyone else under the guise of diversity and inclusion. And I ask you, my friends, where does that leave us as a society? Probably headed toward the same path we've seen before. White communities demanding their own community leaders to act as brokers with the police, because that's exactly what we saw in Birmingham for mobs of Muslim men.
We knew that there was going to be a large amount of people out on that counter-protest. We knew who the vast majority of those people were. We'd had conversations in terms of what that was likely to look like, and so our policing response was commensurate to that intelligence and the information that we'd held with our partners and communities prior to that event taking place.
Even given there were so many of them clearly armed, I mean, would you do the same if it was an EDL type situation?
What I would say is that the vast majority of people that attended that protest yesterday did so law-abidingly, and they did it with the right intentions.
And that was a stark no, wasn't it? Identity politics leads to fragmentation, to division and competition to see who can shout, "I'm oppressed," the loudest. And as long as the state keeps coddling certain groups while cracking down on others, that resentment, that'll fester. It doesn't end with these riots. We'll be left with a broken society split right down racial, religious and cultural lines and have no hope of common citizenship. That flag that represents us all, that won't unite us or hold us together anymore. And I think that, my friends, would be a crying shame. Renee, are you worried about the same things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm massively worried about this. And the problem that we now have is nobody thinks that violence is the answer. We've said this. Nobody should be going out rioting and using violence, but we should have the right to protest, and we shouldn't be shouted down if our views don't marry with the narrative of the government or of the diverse communities who want to shout nasty words at us, you know, like far right or transphobic or Islamophobic, whatever it is. And all we will achieve as a society in doing that, in shutting down conversation, is making it worse and worse until once again the bubble bursts, because people can no longer contain their anger.
Now, Emma, do you think actually there's a problem here for faith and trust in the police in general? Because something like 4 in 10 of the British people think that the British police do not act with an even keel.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have reams and reams of stories that just show that, you know, even if there are strategic reasons why they've made the decision that they've made about policing a certain protest, what people see is that they're not treating people in a way that is fair, and fairness is very important in British culture. You see the charges being dropped against those who called for the rape of Jewish daughters, and then you see the way that these protests have been policed. You see the same with Black Lives Matter and the anti-lockdown protests being treated completely differently. And the message that sends to the British public is that if you have a favourable cause, then you can get away with breaking the law however you want. But if it's a cause that is not favoured, and if you have people who, for example, feel as if they can't be heard on matters of immigration through the democratic process, that is going to build up resentment. Yeah. And when you hear people talking like this superintendent talking about community leaders, well, these are not people who are elected, nor are they people who can be removed by election because they're not elected in the first place. And so these are people who are self-appointed as community leaders who perhaps have no legitimacy democratically with the communities that they purport to represent. And so really the only people that the police strategically should be speaking to as a community leader is the MP, the elected community leader of that constituency.
I take issue with that word community, and I think there's been very good writing about this recently, that we call these groups communities because it sounds soft and cuddly, but when we get to the other side of the coin, to the white people that are protesting, they are far-right protesters, they're not a community.
Yeah, I mean, Benjamin, where are you at on what you've just heard? Common sense, I thought.
No, I mean, look, the idea that Muslim groups areas with large Muslim populations are the only ones to have so-called or self-appointed community leaders is completely wrong. You know, when there's an incident, as there have been regrettably many with the Jewish community, the Board of Deputies, which has a democratic structure, I know, or local leaders are the people that they will liaise with. When you've had attacks on gay people, they will go to people that are organised within the LGBT community. You know, you would have Christian community leaders, right? You know, a vicar isn't elected by anybody, but they're an obvious port of call to deal with concerns of a group if, say, a church were attacked. So I think it is wrong to criticise that. And I've spoken extensively about how appalling I think the anti-Semitism has been in the last year and the attacks on Israel. But I have a problem with the people that are trying to reject that a lot of Muslims in this country, particularly Muslim women, feel extremely vulnerable in recent weeks. And I think the police are absolutely right to reach out to them. Because imagine how it feels if your mosque had bricks thrown at it or someone tried to burn it down, as has happened recently. You know, you are going to be terrified to go about your life.
But isn't it interesting that a lot of these community leaders that represent the Muslim community, no one on the left is pointing out the fact that they all seem to be men?
Yeah, well, indeed, and there is obviously a reason for that. But Adam, I want to bring you in because it strikes me from what Benjamin just said that actually when it comes to the Christian community and all the rest of it, the police aren't saying to them, should we intervene if mobs of men carrying weapons openly attacking pubs and all these other things? If that happens, ought we intervene? Well, the law is the law, right? It ought to be enforced regardless of your race, religion or sexuality or whatever else it might be.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do we have two-tier policing, or is it more a question of having two-tier governing? Actually, I'm glad to see people like Robert Jenrig making a strong stance on this, saying, really, leadership starts from the top. And Benjamin, I'd be interested to see what you think about this. Do we need to see more robust language from the likes of Keir Starmer and the Home Secretary on this? And you know, perhaps the police, they do police without fear or favour. It's actually the layer above that is the real problem here.
I think police in this country are doing a bad job. I think that has far more to do with them being able to mark their own homework than either the last government or the one of the last month and a half. They seem to think they're above any criticism. And actually, if there's any degree of two-tier policing, I think it's the fact that they're more bothered about how they look in the news cycle than how they look at getting people charged and convicted of serious offences. The two-tier is the fact that if a newspaper picks something up and it doesn't go down well, then they'll panic and they'll do something about it. You know, I recently reported a serious crime to Cheshire Police, and weeks and weeks went by and they couldn't care less. So I spoke to a senior police officer and said, OK, how do I get them? They're not investigating this and there's someone at present risk. He said, put it on Twitter. I put it on Twitter. A few hours later, they were investigating it after months of silence. That is the mistake in the police. Now, yeah, I think government should be stricter on that. But I would just point out, a friend who's a police officer, I said to him, is there two-tier policing? And he said, well, when I was dealing with the Black Lives Matter protests and the riots that also happened at the same time, most people there weren't turning up trying to attack the police. But when you've had some of these men that fantasise about Tommy Robinson, they turn up wanting to attack the police.
And what about those that turn up at protests in London shouting for jihad and intifada, who the police say, oh, well, you know, that's absolutely fine, get yourself away.
Jihad
but if they shout on the streets about Allah, you can bet your bottom dollar that they'll be in the slammer. Of course there's two-tier police, and I think you ultimately know that, and I think that actually you know that it's protecting certain people over basically ethnic and religious lines, and that is wrong. That foments the division and actually creates the people that you don't like in society and in politics, and actually gives them a stronger base. So I think that's why it needs to be counted.
Well, I also wonder, Benjamin, whether you have equal concerns for women who are not Muslim, who are scared to walk amongst communities which have changed beyond their recollection. They've lived there all their lives. Are they legitimate in being scared on the streets of London?
Of course, anybody that's in that situation is, right? I mean, as a gay man, I suspect those communities you're thinking about are probably quite... There's an overlap of where the fear would be. But you have to be careful. You know, when there were such serious problems with police and the black community in places like Brixton in the 80s, in the 90s. The answer to that wasn't to say, well, you know, the black people must stop being angry. The way of fixing that was to sit down with them, was to listen to them, was to have the avenue into the community.
I noticed that Benjamin didn't name the community there. I wonder whether you would be so hesitant to name the community if it were, you know, one of the ones that...
No, hang on. Let me be very clear. There is a problem with radical Islam in this country.
Hang on.
And there is a strain of Islam that is dangerous, that is a threat to democracy, that is a threat to the rights of women and gay people. But I don't accept that trying to scar the whole community with those views is right.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome who should have been head of the Met Police, the former Detective Chief Superintendent for the Met, Kevin Hurley. Kevin, thank you very much for giving up time on your trip abroad to join us on this very important topic. You've just seen there those clips that were had during the news where people were being sort of attacked at Dover for protesting against the boats that are coming over in vast numbers to this country. Record just last week, 700 came over in one single Sunday. And for protesting that, they're saying that there's a two-tier element to the actual policing element of such protests. Would you accept that that's the case?
Yes, we've had two-tier policing for at least 30 years, where police officers very quickly learn to tread on eggshells if they're dealing with different ethnic minority communities in the UK. They're very, very sensitive to being called racist or bigoted or in any way biased. And the net result of that is police tend to back off or bend over backwards or avoid confrontation when perhaps confrontation is what's required. I personally have always taken the view that it doesn't matter who you are all equal under the law and should be dealt with in the same way. So if it requires a gentle word of advice, fine. And if it requires really robust responses, then that should happen as well. But the bottom line on it is, police for far too long have, if you like, pussyfooted around certain issues. And we saw it then with that superintendent there in West Midlands who failed to address the question about there were people from a particular group who were carrying weapons, ignored the question and left it in the hands of community leaders. It is not acceptable for any particular group in society to think they are above the law. And for far too long, policing has backed off. And you said I should have perhaps been commissioner in the Met, who knows? However, I can tell you one of the issues that caused me problems when I was serving was the fact that I took a zero tolerance policing approach to all forms of wrongdoing, regardless of where and when you come from.
Well, hang on, Kevin. It caused you issues with who? Who is that? Is that coming from the upper echelons of the force itself?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
The senior leadership of the police service, who always will take the line of least resistance to avoid problems. The fact of the matter is, there are people within our society who are disproportionately involved in crime, and we are no longer in it, but the police service back off. And it's not the constables who are doing this, or indeed the sergeants or even inspectors, but it's certainly chief police officers. And once people reach chief inspector superintending rank in the police, they tend to look for where their next rank is, where their next promotion is, their next pension uplift, quite frankly, because I was part of that. And therefore, they will toe the party line.
Now, Kevin, I must ask you, because, you know, you were, in your opinion and in mine actually as well, you would have been a really good top cheese of the Metropolitan Police. Do you think actually that because you stand against this identity politics, and perhaps we've seen this since the 1980s, Kevin, perhaps it was laudable at the time when, you know, there were protests in the 1980s with black communities who felt that they were mistreated by the police force. And in response to that, we put in place these measures, these diversity and inclusion measures, and especially with the report that came after the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And the fact of the matter was that the response to those moments in our history has been to put in place this kind of policing. But it's had an effect of actually diminishing trust, respect and faith in the force. So how do we get that balance right? Because right now there are a hell of a lot of white people who are saying, well, actually, I feel exactly as black people did in the 1980s.
Well, I think the present commissioner of the Met has got a real challenge on. I don't envy him in the balance he's tried to take. I suppose the best thing you could say if you're the commissioner of the Met is if you've managed to upset everybody, you've probably made the right decision. But the answer to the question The question is that the public, the fact is the public are losing confidence in the police because they are not delivering basic services that they expect from their police in terms of dealing with antisocial behaviour on their streets, responding to burglaries, and when they see various groups, regardless of who they are or what they're protesting about, see them actively breaking the law and no action being taken against them. Yes, the police have got real challenges in terms of manpower and resources, but they have yet to bite the bullet and realise that as the demographics of the country have changed, they need to adopt methods for dealing with public disorder that are very, very effective abroad, such as the use of water cannon. And we could be even cleverer and put index marker solutions like smart water in that spray everybody. And the net result would be that all these drunken louts that have turned up causing trouble in the last week or so in the UK, instead of the police saying, oh, we've got 500, we've got 1,000, they could actually get every single one of them if they'd sprayed them with a marker solution, because you can't get it off.
Right.
So
yeah.
the police have got to go a long way in terms of demonstrating they can regain control against these jobbish elements, whether they are white drunken scum, Asian youths from the local mosque who are turning up causing a problem, or they're anti-Nazi leagues or whatever. Nobody has got confidence now in this country that they can take control. And they've therefore got to change the paradigm of how they deal with public order and start to use modern methods.
So, Kevin, then, just finally, before I go back to the panel, is it your view, because there are many people getting in touch right now who, by the way, love you and what you have to say, but they're asking the question, is what's happening in response to these riots, and, you know, as you mentioned, I concur what you've just said, that those setting fire to buildings and seeking to harm people and all the rest of it, they are and deserve to be criminalised. But is there an issue here that actually the enforcement of this plays into that two-tier narrative? Because there are people who, for example, the Manchester airport couple, there is the fact that Hare Hills, what happened in Hare Hills and Leeds hasn't been dealt with in the same way. You can pinpoint moments over recent times where the police have not acted like this, and there hasn't been this gloating of charging and arrests online and by politicians, that people are starting to say, well, there's one rule for one and a completely different one for others. And is there a worry for you as a former copper that actually that's going to do pretty big damage to trust and faith in police?
Of course it will. I mean, the fact of the matter is, quite rightly, very robust action has been taken at all the drunken louts, the morons who turned up trying to set fire to hotels, attacking police and so on, quite rightly. But what we now want to be able to see from a point of view of public ordinance, the point I've just made, is whoever turns up on the street, quite frankly, if they are causing a problem, they need to be dealt with equally robustly. But there are other issues that the police are failing to deal with firmly and appropriately, such as inner city knife crime, particularly in London, where stop and search has dropped across London by about 2/3.
Well, because that's racist as well, right? That's racist, even though it saves black people's lives, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, the bottom line of it is because the constables on the street have decided it's not in their best interest to stop and search people, particularly from the black community, who are the ones doing the dying and the ones doing the stabbing. So the people actually doing the crying are black mums who lose their sons to knives or guns, or lose their sons to life imprisonment when they're convicted of murder. So
and I remember Cressida Dick said the same thing. The former Met Chief, she said the same thing. But we'll leave that there. Kevin, thank you very much for your time.